All right, let's dive into Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We're going deep, not just skimming the surface, and we're using your notes and highlights as our guide.
Yeah, it's really interesting how he blends those ancient myths,
Hmm.
you know, with evolutionary biology and a modern psychology. Like, how does he do that? We'll get into that.
And why it sparks so much debate.
Yeah, exactly.
I noticed in your notes, you flagged something about Peterson's thinking style.
Oh, yeah.
And it turns out his friend, Dr. Norman Doidge, the one who wrote the foreword, he calls it motoric thinking.
Oh, okay.
It's not just like quiet contemplation, it's this need to think out loud and kind of spar with ideas.
Yeah,
Does that fit with how you've experienced Peterson's work?
absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like his mind is just constantly going, and he likes to challenge himself. He likes to challenge other people.
Hmm.
Deutsch also talks about how this connects to a really important idea in Peterson's work, that struggle to move from chaos to order,
Right.
which he explores a lot in Maps of Meaning.
Which makes me think, even just choosing to read this book and talk about it
Right.
is a way of like imposing order on all the chaos of information out there.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Out of the 12 rules, you highlighted one that really stood out to me.
Okay.
Rule 12, pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. It's
Yeah.
it's so simple, almost whimsical.
Yeah.
But knowing Peterson, there's got to be more to it, right?
Exactly. It's like he's taking this like lighthearted statement
Yeah.
and using it to point to something much deeper.
Hmm.
I think it's about finding those moments of joy and connection,
Hmm.
just like in the chaos of everyday life. Just appreciate the little things.
Yeah.
Be open to unexpected encounters.
I love that interpretation. Sounds
Yeah.
like a little Zen koan
Yeah.
tucked into, a self-help book. You also highlighted a couple of other rules. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Hmm.
That one really seems to speak to Peterson's emphasis on personal responsibility.
Oh, absolutely. He's saying, like, take a look at your own life.
Yeah.
Get your act together before you try to fix everybody else's problems.
Right.
And there was another one you flagged, pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient.
Yeah.
That one's really good.
Yeah, that one really, really struck a chord with me too. It's a challenge, right? To make sure we're not just chasing like that instant gratification,
Yeah,
but really trying to align what we do with what matters.
absolutely. And that ties into his core message about finding meaning in a world that often feels meaningless. He's arguing that meaning isn't just something that happens to us, it's something we create through our choices and actions.
And he's not afraid to go to some like really heavy places to get that point across. You highlighted quite a few things that deal with, kind of darker themes,
Yeah.
like the shadow self and the human capacity for evil.
Yeah, those are big parts of his work. He doesn't shy away from those dark, difficult things. And he forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, like the
Mhm.
fact that we all have that capacity for both good and evil.
And he uses lobsters to make this point. I remember reading that and being like, okay, is this brilliant or totally crazy?
Right, right.
But the lobster analogy, it actually it does make sense when you think about it.
Yeah, yeah. He explains how lobsters, like humans, they have these social hierarchies.
Mm.
And those at the bottom, with lower serotonin levels, they exhibit these really defeated postures.
So he's suggesting that there's a biological basis, right?
Yeah.
To the connection between like posture and confidence and even dominance.
Exactly.
And it applies to humans too,
Yeah.
which is where his advice to stand up straight with your shoulders back comes in.
Right.
It's not just about physical posture, it's about, taking on that posture of strength and confidence in life.
Exactly. It's about taking control, facing those challenges head on.
Right, rather than kind of shrinking back in fear, which I think ties directly into that idea of facing our shadow selves, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're not willing to admit, like, hey, we have a capacity for darkness, we're more likely to just project it onto others.
Right. And then we become victims of our own, like, unexamined impulses.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And speaking of, the world around us, you also highlighted some stuff about Peterson's views on relationships,
Oh, yeah?
specifically his advice on choosing the right friends.
Yeah. And this is where that really simple but powerful rule comes in.
Right.
Make friends with people who want the best for you.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds obvious,
Yeah.
but how often do we find ourselves in those relationships that are just dragging us down?
Right, right.
Yeah.
You actually flagged a quote that I think gets right to the heart of that.
Yeah.
Choosing friends you'd recommend to your family.
Yes. Yes.
That's like a litmus test,
It is. It forces you to really think about the qualities you want in your friends
right?
and what kind of influence they're having on your life.
And it's about being intentional,
Yeah.
right? About who we surround ourselves with.
Yeah, and recognizing that those people have a huge impact on who we become.
And that intentionality seems to be like throughout Peterson's work. He's always urging us to be more, conscious, deliberate, aware of the choices we make
Yes.
and the stories that we tell ourselves.
And that awareness, that commitment to being truthful, both to ourselves and other people, that's what he sees as the foundation for a meaningful life.
Now, we've just barely scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack in 12 Rules for Life, and I'm really looking forward to diving into some of those specific passages and ideas that you highlighted. But before we do that, I kind of want to address the elephant in the room, the controversy surrounding Peterson's work.
Yeah, that's an important part of this conversation. I mean, he has been both praised and criticized,
Hmm.
for his views on gender roles, politics, religion.
Right.
And those criticisms, there's something we need to explore in order to really understand the impact and influence of his work.
Absolutely. And while we're not here to endorse or condemn any particular viewpoint, it's
Yeah.
it's crucial to look at those criticisms with a critical and nuanced lens.
Right. It's about understanding the historical and philosophical context of these debates and how Peterson's ideas both challenge and build upon the work of those who came before him.
So let's dive into some of those controversial areas, starting with Peterson's views on gender roles,
Okay.
which you flagged as particularly interesting and maybe challenging.
Yeah. Peterson, when he talks about gender roles,
Yeah.
it really gets people fired up.
It does, yeah.
You highlighted a passage where he uses the lobster analogy again.
Right.
But this time to talk about the differences between men and women. He suggests that, just like male lobsters, they're wired for aggression and competition.
Right.
Human males, on average, might exhibit some similar tendencies
Yeah.
because of biological factors.
I remember that part. And it definitely gave me pause. It's a tricky subject because on one hand, we can see there are observable differences between men and women.
Right.
But then the question becomes how much of that is biology, nature versus nurture?
Yeah, exactly.
How much of it is societal conditioning?
Yeah, and that's really the core of the debate.
Hmm.
Peterson acknowledges that culture plays a role.
Right.
But he also says you can't just ignore biology.
Right.
Like, he suggests that if we ignore these differences, it can lead to, unrealistic expectations and social policies
Yeah.
that might actually backfire.
Right. So it's not all nature. It's not all nurture.
Yeah.
It's kind of this interplay of both.
Exactly.
And you noted that this whole discussion about gender roles ties into his critique of what he calls radical leftist ideology.
Right. He argues that this ideology, with its focus on power dynamics and group identity, it risks creating division and resentment. And he uses historical examples like, the Soviet Union and Maoist China,
Right.
where, attempts to engineer a perfectly egalitarian society
Yeah.
just led to disastrous consequences.
So he's saying we need to be aware of, the potential downsides
Yeah.
of any ideology that tries to erase individual differences in the name of equality.
Right.
You also pointed out his critique of some aspects of modern feminism.
Yeah.
What stood out to you there?
It wasn't so much a total critique of feminism,
Right.
as much as just a call for more nuanced conversations.
Yeah.
He was concerned that just focusing solely on victimhood
Okay.
and blaming men for all of society's problems, it could be counterproductive.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's like he's urging us to kind of move beyond those simplistic narratives and,
Yeah.
and really engage in more honest and complex dialogues about gender. Now, your area you flagged as being controversial
Yeah.
is Peterson's perspective on religion. Yeah.
Specifically Christianity.
Yeah.
He's a self-described Christian.
Yeah.
But his interpretation, it seems to depart from kind of traditional views.
Right. He sees the Bible more as a source of psychological wisdom than literal truth.
Okay.
He focuses on those deeper meanings of the stories
Right.
and the lessons they offer for navigating life.
You highlighted a section where he connects the biblical story of Cain and Abel
Yeah.
to the modern phenomena of school shootings.
Yeah.
That was a pretty striking comparison.
It was. And he used it to illustrate that timeless human capacity for envy, resentment, and violence. He suggests that, these issues they're not new.
Right.
They're actually deeply rooted in our psyche.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's a reminder that even ancient stories, they can still offer insights into contemporary problems. And you also flagged his comparison of Christ's temptation in the desert.
Yeah. To the challenges we all face in
Hmm.
choosing, what's expedient versus what's truly meaningful.
Right. That's such a thought-provoking connection.
Yeah.
It reframes those biblical stories as metaphors for those internal battles we all fight.
Right.
Like that temptation to take the easy way out versus like the struggle to live a life of purpose and integrity.
So it's like he's saying that those ancient narratives they can serve as a guide
Yeah.
for navigating our own personal journeys. And you noted that he also criticizes like what he sees as hypocrisy within certain Christian communities.
Yeah, he calls out those who, they claim to follow Christ's teachings,
Right.
but they don't really embody them in their actions.
Yeah.
He seemed to be advocating for a more like authentic and lived Christianity, like less focused on dogma and more on embodying those virtue like compassion and forgiveness and self-sacrifice.
Right. It's a call to move beyond like those superficial expressions of faith and really embrace those core principles of love and service. And, this idea of living a more meaningful life rooted in personal responsibility and truth-telling. It seems to be a recurring theme
Oh yeah,
throughout all of Peterson's work.
absolutely. He emphasizes the importance of, setting our houses in order, choosing our friends wisely, and pursuing what truly matters,
All right.
even when it's
Yeah,
hard.
even when it's hard, it's about aligning our actions with our values, right?
Yeah.
And trying to make the world a better place,
Yeah.
even in their small ways.
And he reminds us that this isn't about like achieving some perfect utopia
Right.
or single-handedly fixing all the world's problems.
Yeah.
It's about taking responsibility for our own lives
Yeah.
and making those small incremental improvements, like, cleaning up a messy room.
Yeah, that's such a powerful image, right?
It is.
Starting with something small, something manageable, like picking up one thing that's out of place, then another, and another. It's a reminder that even seemingly insignificant actions, they can contribute to a greater sense of order and purpose.
And that brings us back to that idea of meaning making, right? It's not about those big grand gestures. It's about those daily choices and actions that shape who we are and the world that we live in.
Speaking of meaning making, you highlighted a particularly provocative thought from Peterson,
Yeah.
the idea of writing the words we want inscribed on our souls.
Oh, yes. That one really got me thinking. It's such a powerful exercise in self-reflection. Like you can, articulate the essence of your values, those guiding principles that you want to live by. What words would you choose?
That's a question worth pondering. It challenges us to really think about what truly matters, right? And to live in alignment with those deepest convictions. It really makes you think about, what we want to leave behind, not just in the world, but also in ourselves. It's funny, going back to that rule about petting a cat.
Yeah. It strikes me that it's not just about appreciating those simple joys, but also approaching life with a certain humility.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right.
Yeah, you can't make a cat interact with you.
Right.
You got to be open to the possibility of like getting rejected
Yeah.
and respecting, the cat's agency. There's a lesson there, I think,
Right.
about how we approach relationships and challenges in general.
It's a reminder that, we're not always in control.
Yeah,
And sometimes the best thing is just to offer kindness and see what happens.
exactly.
And that ties into another thing you highlighted,
Okay.
something Peterson talks about a lot, the value of suffering. He doesn't shy away from the fact that life can be hard.
No, he doesn't sugarcoat it.
No.
He argues that suffering is just an inevitable part of being human.
Yeah.
But instead of seeing it as something to like avoid at all costs, he kind of flips it
Yeah.
and says it's an opportunity for growth. I remember that section where he was talking about people who had faced like incredible adversity, survivors of concentration camps, people who'd overcome, serious illness or loss.
Yeah.
And he was suggesting that as painful as those experiences were, they could also like create a really profound sense of meaning and purpose.
Yeah. It's like he's saying that confronting our suffering instead of running away from it, it can actually lead to greater strength, resilience, and wisdom.
Right.
It's a perspective that really challenges like that modern tendency to just always seek comfort and avoid discomfort.
It makes me think of that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Right.
But Peterson, he seems to be taking that idea to like a much deeper, more philosophical level.
He is, and he connects it to that idea of sacrifice.
Right.
He argues that real meaning, it's often found in making sacrifices for something bigger than ourselves,
Right.
whether it's our family, our community, or even like humanity as a whole.
Yeah. So it's about like shifting our focus away from just our own little narrow self-interests
Yeah.
and recognizing that we're part of something larger.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to Peterson's like big message about finding our place in the world, figuring out what we're meant to do.
He encourages us to pursue what he calls the highest good,
Right.
which, it's not about achieving some perfect utopia. It's about striving to make things better, one step at a time.
Yeah, it's not about those grand gestures or revolutionary change. It's about that daily grind
Right.
of making small improvements in ourselves and the world around us.
He uses that analogy of cleaning a messy room. Start by picking up one thing that's out of place,
Yeah.
then another one and another one. It's about taking those small but concrete actions
Yeah.
that over time can lead to real and lasting change.
That's such a grounding image,
Yeah.
It reminds us that we don't have to like solve all the world's problems at once. But we can start by making, our own little corner of the world a little bit better.
Yeah. Yeah. And ultimately, I think that's what Peterson's calling us to do,
Yeah.
to take responsibility for our lives, confront our shadows, seek truth and meaning, and try to leave the world a little bit better than we found it.
Well, it's been a fascinating deep dive into the world of Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. We've explored the rules themselves, looked at some of those more controversial ideas and hopefully sparked some insightful reflections along the way.
And remember, this is just the beginning. If you're intrigued by Peterson's work, there's so much more to discover, from his lectures and his books to the broader intellectual traditions that he's drawing on.
We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, challenge your assumptions, and continue the conversation. As Peterson himself might say, sort yourself out, bucko.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of ideas that matter.